10-year-old girl gives birth. You won't believe it until. The ambulance screamed through the quiet suburban streets, its siren a piercing wail that shattered the Saturday afternoon calm. Inside, Ethan held Grace's hand, his face a mask of terror. Grace, pale and writhing in pain, looked impossibly small, her slight frame swallowed by the stretcher. Her dark hair, usually neatly braided, was a tangled mess, damp with sweat. "Hang on, Gracie, we're almost there," Ethan whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. He squeezed her hand, trying to offer reassurance, but his own hand was trembling. Grace moaned, her eyes squeezed shut. She looked like a child, no older than 10, her features delicate and small. But the rounded swell of her belly, impossibly large on her tiny frame, told a different, terrifying story. The paramedics worked frantically, monitoring her vital signs, administering oxygen. One of them, a young woman named Sarah, glanced at Ethan with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "How old is she?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp. She single quotes she single quotes S25, Ethan stammered, his voice catching in his throat. Sarah's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. She exchanged a quick, meaningful glance with her partner, a silent communication that spoke volumes. The ambulance screeched to a halt at the entrance of Mercy Hospital. The doors flew open, and a team of doctors and nurses rushed out, their faces grim. They quickly assessed Grace's condition, their expressions growing increasingly alarmed. "She's in labor," one of the doctors exclaimed, "and she's losing a lot of blood. We need to get her to the OR immediately." Grace was whisked away, leaving Ethan standing alone in the chaos of the emergency room, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt numb, disoriented, the world spinning around him. He tried to follow the medical team, but a burly security guard blocked his path. "Sir, you need to stay here," the guard said, his voice firm but not unkind. "But that's my wife," Ethan protested, his voice cracking. "I need to be with her." The guard's expression softened slightly, but he didn't budge. "I understand, sir, but we need some information from you. And there are some questions that need to be answered." Ethan didn't understand. Questions? What questions could possibly be more important than being with Grace? He looked around the emergency room, his eyes searching for a friendly face, a sign of understanding. But all he saw were stares, whispers, and averted gazes. People were looking at him, judging him, their expressions a mixture of shock, disgust, and suspicion. A nurse, her face tight with disapproval, approached him. "Sir, we need you to come with us," she said, her voice cold and impersonal. "The police are on their way." "The police?" Ethan's blood ran cold. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. This couldn't be happening. This was a nightmare. He tried to explain, to tell them about Grace, about her condition, about their life together. But his words tumbled out in a jumbled mess, his voice choked with fear and desperation. "She's not a child," he pleaded. "She's 25. She has a medical condition hypopituitarism. It makes her look younger. Please, you have to believe me." But no one seemed to hear him. No one seemed to believe him. The looks of suspicion, of accusation, were unwavering. He was trapped in a nightmare, a horrifying misunderstanding that was spiraling out of control. And all he could think about was Grace, his beloved Grace, fighting for her life, alone. The arrival of the police escalated the situation from a medical emergency to a potential crime scene. Two officers, a stern-faced man named Officer Miller and a younger, more sympathetic woman named Officer Ramirez, approached Ethan. "Sir, we need you to come with us," Officer Miller said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You're being detained for questioning." Ethan, still reeling from the shock and fear, could only offer weak protests. "But my wife she needs me. I need to be with her." "We understand, sir," Officer Ramirez said, her voice softer than her partner's. "But we need to clarify some things. It'll be quicker if you cooperate." Ethan was led to a small, sterile room, his hands cuffed behind his back. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into his wrists, a physical manifestation of the accusations that were swirling around him. The room was bare, furnished only with a table and two chairs. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh, unflattering glow. Ethan felt a growing sense of dread, a suffocating feeling of being trapped. Officer Miller began the questioning, his tone accusatory. "How old are you, sir?" 32, Ethan replied, his voice hoarse. "And how long have you known the young woman who was brought in?" "She's my wife," Ethan corrected him, his voice trembling with anger and frustration. "Her name is Grace, and we've been together for 5 years, married for 3. Officer Miller raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. You're claiming that a woman who appears to be no older than 10 is your wife? Yes, Ethan insisted. She has a medical condition. Hypopituitarism. It stunts her growth. It makes her look much younger than she is. Officer Miller and Officer Ramirez exchanged a look. It was clear they didn't believe him. Do you have any proof of this condition? Officer Miller asked. Her medical records, Ethan said desperately. They're at the hospital. Dr. Lawson, she's her endocrinologist. She can explain everything. Officer Miller made a note, but his expression remained unchanged. He continued to grill Ethan, his questions becoming increasingly invasive and accusatory. He asked about their relationship, their history, their life together. He implied that Ethan was a predator, a monster who had preyed on a vulnerable child. Ethan, exhausted and overwhelmed, struggled to answer the questions. He felt like he was drowning in a sea of suspicion, his words twisted and misinterpreted. Meanwhile, back in the emergency room, chaos reigned. The news of the child bride had spread like wildfire, fueled by whispers, rumors, and social media posts. Onlookers gathered outside the hospital, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and outrage. Reporters arrived, their cameras flashing, their microphones thrusting. They demanded answers, fueling the public frenzy. The hospital staff, initially shocked and horrified, were beginning to have doubts. Dr. Emily Carter, the attending physician in the emergency room, had reviewed Grace's initial examination. Something didn't quite add up. Grace's physical development, while delayed, showed signs of maturity that were inconsistent with a 10-year-old. Her bone density, her hormone levels, and other subtle indicators suggested she was older than she appeared. Dr. Carter ordered a series of additional tests, including a bone age scan and a comprehensive hormonal panel. She also contacted Dr. Lawson, Grace's endocrinologist, requesting her medical records. As the results began to trickle in, Dr. Carter's suspicions were confirmed. The bone age scan showed that Grace's skeletal maturity was consistent with a young adult, not a child. The hormonal panel revealed a complex pattern of deficiencies, characteristic of hypopituitarism. The truth was slowly beginning to emerge, a truth that was far more complex and nuanced than the initial, horrifying assumptions. While the medical and legal dramas unfolded at the hospital, Ethan sat alone in the interrogation room, his mind racing. He replayed the events of the day, the terrifying rush to the hospital, the accusations, the disbelief. But his thoughts kept returning to Grace, to their life together, to the love that had sustained them through countless challenges. He remembered the first time he had met Grace. It had been at a support group for adults with rare medical conditions. Ethan, a software engineer with a mild form of Tourette's syndrome, had been attending the meetings for several months, seeking a sense of community and understanding. Grace had walked into the room, her small stature making her seem almost invisible among the other attendees. But her eyes, large and luminous, held a spark of intelligence and warmth that immediately drew him in. He had been struck by her beauty, a delicate, almost ethereal quality that transcended her physical appearance. He had initially assumed she was a teenager, a volunteer perhaps, accompanying a parent. But when she introduced herself, her voice clear and confident, he realized his mistake. "Hi, I'm Grace," she had said. "I have hypopituitarism." Ethan had never heard of the condition. Grace explained, patiently and without self-pity, how the deficiency of pituitary hormones had affected her growth, making her appear much younger than her actual age. She described the challenges she had faced, the constant misperceptions, the medical treatments, and the emotional toll of living with a condition that made her stand out. Ethan had been captivated by her resilience, her humor, and her unwavering spirit. He had found himself drawn to her, not out of pity, but out of genuine admiration and affection. They had started talking, sharing their experiences, their hopes, and their fears. They had discovered a connection, a shared understanding that transcended their individual conditions. Their friendship had blossomed into romance, slowly and cautiously. Ethan had been hesitant at first, concerned about the age difference, the potential for social judgment, and the complexities of Grace's medical needs. But Grace had reassured him, her unwavering belief in their love overcoming his doubts. "Age is just a number, Ethan," she had said. "What matters is our connection, our hearts. And I know, in my heart, that we are meant to be together." They had faced challenges, of course. There were stares, whispers, and outright accusations. People often mistook Grace for Ethan's daughter, or even his younger sister. They had learned to ignore the ignorance, to shield themselves from the judgment, and to focus on their love for each other. They had consulted with Dr. Lawson, Grace's endocrinologist, about the possibility of having children. It had been a difficult and emotional decision. Grace's condition presented significant risks, both for her and for a potential pregnancy. But their desire to have a family, to create a life together, had outweighed the risks. They had undergone extensive counseling, medical evaluations, and fertility treatments. The pregnancy itself had been a miracle, a testament to their love and determination. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by the return of Officer Ramirez. She looked at him, her expression softer now, a hint of understanding in her eyes. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "we've received some new information. We've spoken with Dr. Lawson, and we've reviewed Grace's medical records." Ethan held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew what was coming. "It appears there's been a misunderstanding," Officer Ramirez continued. "Your wife's condition ... It explains her appearance. We're releasing you." Relief washed over Ethan, a wave so intense it almost brought him to his knees. He was free. He could go to Grace. But the relief was quickly followed by anger, a burning resentment towards the people who had judged him, who had accused him without knowing the truth. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to demand an apology. But he knew that wouldn't help. He needed to focus on Grace, on their unborn child. He needed to be strong for them. Dr. Carter, the physician, paced nervously outside the operating room. The initial chaos had subsided, replaced by a tense, quiet anticipation. The additional tests she had ordered had confirmed her suspicions. Grace was indeed a 25-year-old woman with hypopituitarism. The bone age scan, a specialized X-ray that assessed skeletal maturity, was the most definitive piece of evidence. It showed that Grace's bones, while smaller than average, were consistent with those of a young adult, not a child. The hormonal panel revealed a complex pattern of deficiencies, confirming the diagnosis of hypopituitarism. Her levels of growth hormone, thyroid hormone, and other crucial hormones were significantly below normal, explaining her stunted growth and delayed puberty. Dr. Carter had immediately contacted Dr. Lawson, Grace's endocrinologist, who had provided a detailed medical history and confirmed the diagnosis. Dr. Lawson explained that Grace had been diagnosed with hypopituitarism as a child and had been receiving hormone replacement therapy for years. The pregnancy, while high risk, had been carefully monitored by Dr. Lawson and a team of specialists. Grace had been aware of the potential complications, but she and Ethan had been determined to have a child. Dr. Carter felt a wave of guilt and shame wash over her. She, like everyone else, had jumped to conclusions, assuming the worst based on appearances. She had allowed her own biases and prejudices to cloud her judgment. She realized the profound impact of their misjudgment, not just on Ethan, who had been wrongly accused and detained, but on Grace, who was fighting for her life in the operating room. She gathered the medical team, the nurses, and the residents who had been involved in Grace's initial assessment. She explained the situation, her voice filled with regret. "We made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "A serious mistake. We judged this woman based on her appearance, and we were wrong. Grace is not a child. She's a 25-year-old woman with a rare medical condition." The room was silent, the faces of the medical staff reflecting a mixture of shock, disbelief, and shame. They had all been caught up in the initial panic, the horrifying assumption of abuse. Dr. Carter continued, her voice firm. "We need to focus on saving her life, and the life of her child. We need to put aside our prejudices and our assumptions, and we need to provide the best possible care." The medical team, chastened and humbled, rededicated themselves to Grace's care. They worked with renewed focus and determination, their initial horror replaced by a shared sense of responsibility and a commitment to righting their wrong. The news of the medical revelation slowly began to filter out of the operating room, spreading through the hospital like ripples in a pond. The whispers and stares that had followed Ethan earlier now shifted, replaced by a mixture of curiosity, embarrassment, and, for some, a dawning sense of empathy. The security guard who had detained Ethan approached him, his face apologetic. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice low. I'm so sorry. We were just following protocol. We had no idea." Ethan, still reeling from the emotional roller coaster of the past few hours, simply nodded. He didn't have the energy for anger or recrimination. He just wanted to be with Grace. Officer Ramirez, who had shown Ethan more empathy than her partner, led him back to the waiting area. She explained that Dr. Lawson had arrived and was speaking with the hospital's legal team and the police. The situation, she assured him, was being resolved. Ethan sat down heavily, his legs feeling weak. The adrenaline that had fueled him through the initial crisis was fading, leaving him drained and emotionally exhausted. He closed his eyes, trying to block out the noise and the stares, focusing on Grace, on their love, on the hope that she would be okay. A few minutes later, Dr. Lawson emerged from a conference room, her face serious but composed. She was a tall, slender woman in her late 50s, with a calm and reassuring demeanor. She approached Ethan, extending her hand. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice gentle. "I'm Dr. Lawson, Grace's endocrinologist. I've explained everything to the authorities. They understand the situation now." Ethan grasped her hand, his grip tight. "How is she, doctor? Is she going to be all right?" Dr. Lawson's expression softened. "She's in surgery. It's a difficult delivery, and she's lost a significant amount of blood. But the surgical team is doing everything they can. She's a fighter, Mr. Thompson. She's incredibly strong." Ethan nodded, tears welling in his eyes. He knew Grace's strength, her resilience. He had witnessed it countless times over the years. But the fear, the uncertainty, was still overwhelming. Dr. Lawson explained Grace's condition in more detail, answering Ethan's questions patiently and compassionately. She described the challenges of hypopituitarism, the hormonal imbalances, and the risks associated with pregnancy. "Grace knew the risks," Dr. Lawson said, "but she and you were determined to have a child. You both understood the potential complications." Ethan nodded again, his throat tight with emotion. He remembered the long discussions, the research, the consultations with specialists. They had made the decision together, fully aware of the challenges. Officer Miller, his face now reflecting a mixture of embarrassment and contrition, approached Ethan. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice stiff, "we're releasing you. There are no charges. I apologize for the misunderstanding." Ethan simply nodded, unable to speak. He didn't care about apologies. He just wanted to be with Grace. Dr. Lawson led Ethan to a private waiting area near the operating room. She promised to keep him updated on Grace's progress. Ethan sat alone, his mind racing. He prayed, he pleaded, he bargained with whatever higher power might be listening. He promised to be a better husband, a better father, a better person, if only Grace and their baby would be spared. The waiting was agonizing. Time seemed to stretch on forever, each minute an eternity. He paced, he sat, he stared at the walls, his thoughts a jumbled mess of fear, hope, and love. He thought about their life together, the simple joys, the shared laughter, the unwavering support they had given each other. He thought about the future they had planned, the dreams they had shared. He refused to believe that it could all be taken away. He had to believe that Grace would be okay, that their family would be whole again. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a nurse emerged from the operating room. Her face was tired, but there was a faint smile playing on her lips. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "your wife is stable. The surgery was successful, but she lost a lot of blood. She's going to need a transfusion." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed by a new surge of fear. A transfusion? What if they couldn't find a match? What if ... He didn't have time to dwell on the fear. He knew he had to be strong, for Grace, for their child. "What's her blood type?" he asked, his voice surprisingly steady. "O negative," the nurse replied. "It's a rare type." Ethan felt a flicker of hope. "I'm O negative," he said. "I can donate." The news that Grace needed an O-negative blood transfusion sent a wave of urgency through the hospital. It was a rare blood type, and the hospital supply was limited. While they contacted the regional blood bank, every moment counted. Ethan's offer to donate was a lifeline. He was immediately taken to the blood donation center, where a phlebotomist prepped him for the procedure. He felt a strange mixture of fear and relief. Fear for Grace, but relief that he could do something, that he wasn't completely helpless. As the needle was inserted into his arm, he closed his eyes and focused on Grace. He imagined her face, her smile, her gentle touch. He visualized her holding their baby, their family together, healthy and happy. Meanwhile, in the operating room, the surgical team was working frantically to deliver the baby and control Grace's bleeding. Dr. Carter, now fully aware of Grace's medical history, was coordinating the effort, her initial misjudgment replaced by a fierce determination to save her patient. The delivery was complicated by Grace's small size and the pre-existing hormonal imbalances. The baby, a boy, was in distress, his heart rate fluctuating dangerously. Dr. Carter made the decision to perform an emergency C-section. The procedure was swift and precise, but Grace's blood loss was significant. Her blood pressure plummeted, her vital signs becoming increasingly unstable. "We're losing her," one of the nurses exclaimed, her voice tight with panic. Dr. Carter remained calm, her voice steady and authoritative. "Start the transfusion protocol," she ordered, "and get that blood here now." The team worked with a synchronized urgency, their movements precise and efficient. They administered fluids, medications, and clotting factors, fighting to stabilize Grace's condition. The wait for Ethan's blood felt like an eternity. Every second ticked by, each one a potential threat to Grace's life. Finally, a nurse rushed into the operating room, carrying a bag of Ethan's freshly donated blood. The transfusion began immediately, the life-giving fluid flowing into Grace's veins. Slowly, gradually, Grace's vital signs began to improve. Her blood pressure stabilized, her heart rate strengthened, and her color began to return. The baby, meanwhile, had been delivered and was being cared for in the neonatal intensive care unit (NICU). He was small, but his initial assessments were promising. The tension in the operating room began to ease, replaced by a cautious optimism. The surgical team completed the C-section, carefully closing the incision. Dr. Carter let out a long, slow breath, her shoulders slumping with relief. "She's stable," she announced. "We did it." The team exchanged weary smiles, a shared sense of accomplishment and gratitude. They had faced a daunting challenge, and they had prevailed. But the ordeal was far from over. Grace remained in critical condition, her recovery uncertain. She would need to be closely monitored in the intensive care unit ICU for the next several days. Ethan, his blood donation complete, was weak and lightheaded, but his heart was filled with a fragile hope. He had done all he could. Now, it was up to Grace, and to the medical team, to bring her through. He was allowed to see her briefly in the ICU, a fleeting moment that was both heartbreaking and reassuring. She was pale and unconscious, hooked up to a multitude of machines, her small body dwarfed by the medical equipment. But she was alive, and that was all that mattered. Ethan sat beside Grace's bed in the ICU, holding her hand. Her skin was cool and clammy, her breathing shallow but steady. The rhythmic beeping of the monitors was a constant reminder of her fragility, but also of her resilience. He talked to her, softly, whispering words of love and encouragement. He told her about their son, about how much he looked like her, about how strong he was. He promised her that they would get through this, that they would be a family, together. He didn't know if she could hear him, but he hoped that his voice, his presence, would offer some comfort, some sense of connection. The nurses and doctors came and went, checking her vital signs, adjusting her medications, monitoring her progress. They were professional and efficient, but there was a new warmth in their demeanor, a respect for Grace and Ethan that hadn't been there before. They had witnessed Ethan's selfless act, his willingness to donate blood to save his wife's life. They had seen the depth of his love, the unwavering devotion that had sustained them through the ordeal. Dr. Carter approached Ethan, her expression somber but hopeful. "She's responding well to the transfusion," she said. "Her blood pressure is stable, and her color is improving. But she's still very weak. We need to give her time to heal." Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He understood the risks, the uncertainties, but he also trusted in Grace's strength, in her will to live. He spent the next few days at Grace's bedside, rarely leaving her side. He slept in a chair, ate when he could, and focused all his energy on willing her to recover. He talked to their son, Noah, in the NICU, marveling at his tiny perfection, his delicate features, his strong grip. He promised Noah that his mother would be home soon, that they would all be together as a family. Slowly, gradually, Grace began to show signs of improvement. Her breathing became stronger, her color improved, and her vital signs stabilized. She started to respond to stimuli, squeezing Ethan's hand, fluttering her eyelids. One morning, as Ethan sat beside her, holding her hand and whispering to her, Grace's eyes opened. She looked at him, her gaze weak but focused. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Ethan's heart leapt with joy. He squeezed her hand, tears streaming down his face. "I'm here, Gracie," he said. "I'm here." She smiled, a faint, fragile smile that lit up her face. "Our baby," she whispered. "He's fine," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion. "He's perfect. He looks just like you." Grace closed her eyes again, a single tear rolling down her cheek. She was exhausted, but she was alive. And she was with the two people she loved most in the world. The road to recovery would be long and arduous, but Grace had survived. Ethan's sacrifice, his blood donation, had been a crucial factor in her survival. It was a testament to the power of love, the unbreakable bond between them. Their story, once filled with misunderstanding and judgment, was now a story of resilience, hope, and the extraordinary power of the human spirit. The news of Grace's survival, and the truth about her condition, spread quickly through the hospital and beyond. The initial outrage and accusations were replaced by a wave of relief, empathy, and, for many, shame. The reporters who had been clamoring for a scandal now scrambled to tell the real story, the story of a loving couple, a rare medical condition, and a miraculous survival. The online comments, once filled with hateful vitriol, shifted to expressions of support and apologies. People who had judged Ethan and Grace without knowing the facts now offered words of encouragement and well wishes. The hospital administration issued a formal apology to Ethan and Grace, acknowledging the mistakes that had been made and promising to review their procedures to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. The apologies, while appreciated, couldn't erase the pain and trauma that Ethan and Grace had endured. The accusations, the judgment, the public scrutiny had left deep scars, but they also found strength in the outpouring of support from unexpected quarters. Strangers reached out to them, sharing their own stories of medical challenges, of being misjudged, of overcoming adversity. The support group where they had first met rallied around them, offering practical help and emotional support. They organized meals, offered childcare, and created a safe space for Ethan and Grace to share their feelings and begin to heal. Officer Miller, the stern-faced policeman who had initially detained Ethan, visited him at the hospital. He apologized profusely, his voice filled with genuine remorse. "I was wrong, Mr. Thompson," he said. "I judged you based on appearances, and I made a terrible mistake. I hope you can forgive me." Ethan, while still hurt and angry, accepted the apology. He understood that Officer Miller had been doing his job, albeit with a flawed understanding of the situation. He knew that holding onto anger would only hinder his own healing. The most difficult reconciliation was with some members of their own community. The whispers and stares didn't disappear overnight. Some people remained skeptical, clinging to their initial assumptions despite the evidence. But Ethan and Grace found solace in each other, in their love for their son, and in the support of their true friends and family. They focused on moving forward, on building a new life, and on educating others about hyperpituitarism and the importance of empathy. The experience had changed them, irrevocably. It had tested their strength, their resilience, and their faith. But it had also deepened their love, strengthened their bond, and reaffirmed their commitment to each other and to their family. They knew that the scars of the past would always be with them, but they were determined to not let those scars define them. They would use their experience to raise awareness, to challenge prejudice, and to inspire hope. Grace's recovery was slow but steady. The physical trauma of the childbirth, compounded by her pre-existing condition, took a significant toll on her body. She spent several weeks in the hospital, gradually regaining her strength and learning to care for her newborn son. The nurses and doctors who had initially misjudged her now treated her with the utmost respect and care. They had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of snap judgments and the importance of empathy. Dr. Carter, in particular, took a special interest in Grace's recovery. She visited her regularly, offering support and encouragement. She apologized profusely for her initial misjudgment, expressing her deep regret for the pain she had caused. Grace, while still hurt by the experience, accepted Dr. Carter's apology. She understood that mistakes could be made, that even medical professionals were susceptible to biases and prejudices. She found solace in spending time with Noah, her tiny son. Holding him in her arms, feeling his warmth, his heartbeat, filled her with a profound sense of love and gratitude. He was a miracle, a testament to her strength and resilience. Ethan was a constant presence at her side, helping her with everything from feeding Noah to taking short walks around the hospital floor. He was her rock, her support system, her unwavering source of love. As Grace regained her physical strength, she began to reflect on the ordeal she had endured. She thought about the initial shock and disbelief, the fear and uncertainty, the public scrutiny and judgment. She realized that the experience had changed her in profound ways. It had made her stronger, more resilient, and more determined to live her life to the fullest. She also realized the importance of educating others about hypopituitarism, about the challenges faced by people with rare medical conditions. She decided to become an advocate, to share her story, and to raise awareness about the importance of empathy and understanding. She had several heartfelt conversations with Ethan, discussing their feelings, their fears, and their hopes for the future. They talked about the trauma they had endured, the lessons they had learned, and the importance of moving forward. "We can't let this define us, Ethan," Grace said one evening, as they sat together in her hospital room. "We need to learn from it, to grow from it, but we can't let it consume us." Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with love and admiration. "You're right, Gracie," he said. "We've been through hell, but we came out stronger. We have each other, we have Noah, and we have a future to build." They made a pact, a promise to themselves and to each other, to live their lives with intention, to cherish every moment, and to never take their love for granted. The ordeal had tested their relationship, but it had also strengthened it. They had faced the worst together, and they had emerged victorious. The transformation within the hospital walls was palpable. The nurses, doctors, and even the administrative staff who had initially been caught up in the wave of misinformation and prejudice now approached Grace and Ethan with a newfound respect and understanding. Nurse Sarah, the young paramedic who had first responded to the emergency call, sought out Ethan. She had been deeply affected by the experience, realizing the profound consequences of her initial assumptions. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice hesitant, "I wanted to apologize. I misjudged you, and I misjudged Grace. I let my own biases cloud my judgment, and I'm truly sorry." Ethan, touched by her sincerity, offered a forgiving smile. "It's okay," he said. "I understand. It was a chaotic situation, and it's easy to jump to conclusions. What matters is that you learn from it." Sarah nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "I have," she said. "This experience has changed me. It's made me a better paramedic, and a better person." Dr. Carter, too, continued to demonstrate her commitment to Grace's well-being, going above and beyond her professional duties. She spent extra time with Grace, discussing her recovery, answering her questions, and offering emotional support. She also initiated a series of training sessions for the hospital staff, focusing on the importance of cultural sensitivity, empathy, and avoiding snap judgments based on appearances. She used Grace and Ethan's case as a powerful example of the potential harm caused by prejudice and misinformation. The hospital staff, initially resistant to the training, gradually came to understand the importance of Dr. Carter's message. They realized that their own biases had contributed to a deeply traumatic experience for Grace and Ethan, and they were determined to do better. The change in attitude was evident in the small, everyday interactions. Nurses who had once avoided eye contact now greeted Grace and Ethan with smiles. Doctors who had been dismissive now took the time to listen to their concerns. The hospital environment, once filled with suspicion and judgment, became a place of healing and support. Grace and Ethan found themselves surrounded by a community of caregivers who were genuinely invested in their well-being. One evening, a group of nurses organized a small, informal gathering for Grace and Ethan in the hospital's lounge. They brought homemade cookies, cards, and small gifts for Noah. It was a simple gesture, but it meant the world to Grace and Ethan. It was a symbol of the hospital staff's genuine remorse and their commitment to making amends. "We're so sorry for what you went through," one of the nurses said, her voice choked with emotion. "We were wrong, and we're so grateful that you're both okay." Grace, her eyes filled with tears, accepted their apologies. She knew that forgiveness was a process, but she was willing to extend grace to those who had shown genuine remorse. The gathering was a turning point, a moment of healing and reconciliation. It marked a shift from a culture of judgment to a culture of empathy and understanding. The hospital staff's change of heart was not just a personal victory for Grace and Ethan. It was a testament to the power of education, the importance of self-reflection, and the possibility of redemption. It was a reminder that even in the face of profound mistakes, there was always room for growth and change. The day finally arrived when Grace was discharged from the hospital. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with both excitement and trepidation. They were eager to start their new life as a family, but they also knew that the challenges were far from over. Packing their belongings, Grace held Noah close, breathing in his sweet baby scent. He was a constant reminder of their resilience, their love, and the miracle of his birth. Ethan, ever the practical one, made sure they had everything they needed: diapers, formula, clothes, and the countless medications Grace still required. He had become an expert in navigating the complexities of her medical needs, a testament to his unwavering devotion. Dr. Carter came to say goodbye, her eyes filled with genuine warmth and affection. "You two are an inspiration," she said, hugging Grace tightly. "You've taught us all a valuable lesson. I'll never forget you." The nurses who had cared for Grace during her stay also gathered to say farewell, offering words of encouragement and well wishes. The atmosphere was a far cry from the cold suspicion they had encountered upon their arrival. As they prepared to leave, Grace and Ethan took a moment to reflect on their journey. They had been through a harrowing ordeal, a roller coaster of emotions that had tested their strength and their relationship. "We did it, Gracie," Ethan said, his voice filled with emotion. "We made it through." Grace nodded, her eyes sparkling with tears. "We did," she said, "and we're stronger for it." They knew that the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, both medical and social. They would likely face continued misunderstandings and judgments, but they were prepared to face them together, armed with their love, their resilience, and the lessons they had learned. They discussed their plans for the future. They would continue to advocate for people with rare medical conditions, sharing their story and raising awareness about hypopituitarism. They would educate others about the importance of empathy and understanding, challenging prejudice and promoting acceptance. They would also focus on creating a loving, stable, and nurturing home for Noah, shielding him from the negativity of the world and instilling in him the values of kindness, compassion, and respect. They knew that their experience would forever be a part of their lives, a defining chapter in their story. But they were determined to not let it define them. They would embrace the future with hope, courage, and an unwavering commitment to each other and to their son. As they walked out of the hospital doors, hand in hand, with Noah nestled safely in Ethan's arms, they felt a sense of liberation, of new beginnings. They were stepping into a new chapter of their lives, a chapter filled with uncertainty, but also with immense possibility. The sunlight felt warm on their faces as they stepped outside, a welcome contrast to the sterile environment of the hospital. The fresh air filled their lungs, a symbol of the new life that awaited them. Passers-by on the street glanced at them, some with curiosity, others with indifference. But Grace and Ethan no longer cared about the stares or the whispers. They had learned to find strength within themselves, in their love for each other and their son. They carefully placed Noah in his car seat, securing him safely for the journey home. As Ethan drove, Grace looked at her reflection in the side mirror. She saw a young woman, tired but radiant, her eyes filled with a newfound strength. She saw a mother, a wife, a survivor. She saw someone who had been through hell and had emerged stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever. The drive home was quiet, filled with a peaceful contentment. They were together, they were safe, and they were finally going home. As they pulled into their driveway, they saw that their neighbors had decorated their front porch with balloons and a welcome home banner. It was a small gesture, but it touched them deeply. It was a sign that they were not alone, that they had a community that cared. They settled into their home, adjusting to the rhythms of life with a newborn. There were sleepless nights, endless diaper changes, and the constant demands of caring for a tiny human being. But there was also immense joy, profound love, and a sense of completeness they had never known before. Their experience had left an indelible mark on their lives, shaping their perspectives and influencing their decisions. They became more patient, more understanding, and more appreciative of the simple things in life. They continued to share their story, speaking at conferences, support groups, and medical schools. They became advocates for patient rights, educating others about hypopituitarism and the importance of empathy and compassion. They taught Noah, as he grew older, about the importance of kindness, acceptance, and not judging others based on appearances. They instilled in him the values that had guided them through their own ordeal. Their story became a lesson, a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, that everyone has a story, and that empathy and understanding are essential for building a more compassionate and just world. It was a lesson that resonated far beyond their small community, reaching people across the country and around the world. Their experience became a catalyst for change, inspiring others to challenge their own biases and to treat everyone with respect and dignity. And so Grace, Ethan, and Noah lived their lives, not as victims of circumstance, but as survivors, as advocates, and as a family bound together by love, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to making a difference in the world. Their story, once filled with misunderstanding and judgment, had become a story of hope, healing, and the transformative power of empathy. It was a story that reminded everyone that true beauty lies not in outward appearance, but in the strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of love.